The accusation came without warning, loud enough to carry through 3 corridors of the Hale Group's private estate. Security. I need security in the East Wing now. Cora Sutton had been sitting at her desk for 11 hours. She hadn't taken a lunch break. She'd been cross-referencing 6 months of Staff Welfare Fund disbursements, because something in the numbers wasn't sitting right. A small discrepancy, maybe $400, the kind of thing that most accountants might round off and forget. Cora didn't round numbers. Cora never forgot numbers. She was still looking at her screen when the door opened and 2 security guards stepped in. Miss Sutton. The taller one didn't meet her eyes. Come with us, please. Helena Dumont arrived a moment later, heels clicking across the marble floor with a precision that felt deliberately theatrical. The estate director of operations had always moved like someone who expected rooms to rearrange themselves ahead of her. The Staff Welfare Fund, Helena said, stopping just far enough away to make Cora feel the distance. $4,700 over 4 months. She tilted her head. Would you like to explain the transfers? Cora looked up slowly. Those transfers were approved budget disbursements. I processed them myself. Every one of them has documentation. Then you won't mind if we look through your things. I'd mind very much, actually. The guards moved before Cora could stand. One took her by the arm, not roughly, but with the kind of firmness that made it clear she wasn't being asked. The other reached across her desk toward her bag. Don't touch that. Her voice was quiet, steadier than she felt. Helena took 1 step forward and slapped her across the face. The sound was flat and sharp. A few staff members who had gathered in the hallway flinched. One young woman in payroll pressed her hand to her mouth. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. They all looked at the floor, or at the wall, or at nothing in particular, because looking at Cora meant being implicated in whatever came next. The sting spread from Cora's cheek up through her temple. She pressed her lips together and didn't make a sound. She had long ago learned that crying in front of people like Helena only gave them more. That's enough. The voice came from the far end of the corridor. Calder Hale was 43 years old and had never in his life needed to raise his voice to make a room go still. He walked the length of the hallway with the unhurried certainty of a man who understood, on a cellular level, that the ground belonged to him wherever he stood. His company, officially, was one of Western Canada's largest private real estate development groups. Unofficially, every serious criminal organization between Vancouver and Calgary knew better than to do business in his territory without permission. He stopped in front of Cora. He looked at the red mark spreading across her face. He looked at the guard still holding her arm. Let go of her. The guard released her immediately. Calder said nothing more. He simply looked at Helena for a long moment, the kind of look that didn't carry anger, because anger was too human, too manageable. What his eyes carried was something much colder than that. He turned to Reed Sharp, who had appeared silently at his shoulder, the way Reed always appeared, which was to say without warning and exactly when needed. Pull every camera feed from the last 6 hours, every floor, every stairwell, every access log tied to those fund accounts. He paused. Nothing leaves the building until I say so. Reed was already on his radio before Calder finished speaking. Calder guided Cora into a small meeting room off the corridor, closed the door, and placed a clean cloth from his jacket pocket on the table beside her without comment. She stared at it for a moment. You don't have to do that, she said. I know. He sat across from her, his hands flat on the table. Tell me what you found. She blinked. Sorry? Before she came in, you were looking at something. What was it? Cora studied him the way she studied a balance sheet, carefully, looking for what didn't match. Then she told him. The discrepancies. The pattern. the 4-month timeline that she'd been quietly reconstructing all afternoon. Not because anyone asked her to, but because it bothered her, and she couldn't leave things that bothered her alone. Calder listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You found it," he said. "The same thing she accused you of. The transfers she said I made don't match my login timestamps. I wasn't in the system during 3 of those windows. I was in a vendor meeting on 2 of them. That's on record." He almost smiled. It was a very small almost. "It'll be on camera, too." It took Reed 40 minutes. The footage was unambiguous. Helena Dumont, in her own office, moving the funds. A separate angle caught her accessing Cora's workstation with a copied keycard during a period when Cora had been documented off-site. The manipulation had been careful, but not careful enough for the kind of system the Hale Group ran. Reed brought the summary to Calder without ceremony. The full staff had been gathered in the main conference hall by then. Housekeeping, kitchen, grounds crew, administrative, security. Everyone stood in rows and tried to look like they weren't holding their breath. Calder walked in last. He looked at Helena first. She was still standing near the front, arms crossed, the posture of someone who had not yet understood what kind of trouble she was in. "The investigation is complete." His voice carried the room without effort. The transfers were fabricated. The evidence against Miss Sutton was planted. The accusation was false. A ripple moved through the crowd. Helena's expression went through several things in rapid succession before it settled on disbelief. "You hit an innocent employee," Calder continued. "You used this company's security personnel to carry out a personal vendetta. You attempted to have someone criminally charged for a theft you committed." He paused. "You're dismissed. Effective immediately. Escort her out, please." Helena started to speak. Calder had already turned away. As 2 guards moved toward her, she said something about lawyers, about contracts, about everything she'd built for this organization. No one responded. The room watched her go in complete silence, and the silence was the answer. When the doors closed, Calder turned to the remaining staff. "No employee in this building will ever be humiliated for reasons that have nothing to do with their work. Not for how they look. Not for where they come from. Not for what they weigh. Not for anything else outside this door." He said it plainly, without drama. "If anyone here believes their authority gives them the right to degrade another person, then they have no place working for this company." The room was very still. Several people who had stood in that hallway and said nothing were now finding the floor very interesting. In the back of the room, Cora stood with her hands folded in front of her, her cheek still faintly red. Justice had arrived, quick and total, the way it almost never arrived in real life. She had watched Helena be dismantled sentence by sentence in front of everyone. She still didn't feel like celebrating. She pressed her fingers lightly to her face and thought about all the rooms she had stood in that were not so different from the hallway outside. Different buildings, different faces, same silence. The estate settled back into its routines within a few days. The paperwork was finalized. A new director of operations was brought in. Cora returned to her desk and her numbers and her careful, methodical work. Every morning without fail, Reed Sharp glanced at his phone at 7:45 and asked whoever was nearby whether Cora had come in yet. Everyone understood, after the first week, that he wasn't asking for himself. Calder never said it directly. He didn't need to. The question was always framed as operational. Was the finance team fully staffed? Was the quarterly audit proceeding on schedule? But Reed had worked beside this man for 9 years, and he had never once heard him ask about the quarterly audit at 7:45 in the morning before. Cora, for her part, went back to being the person she had always been, which was the person most people in that building had managed to overlook for the better part of 2 years. She arrived before anyone else. She left long after the lights went down on the main floor. On her way out each night, she left small, unmarked notes on the desks of junior staff whose work she had noticed. Not praise exactly. More like acknowledgement. The reconciliation you flagged saved us a 12-hour correction. Good catch. No signature. Calder found out about the notes from Reed's weekly summary, buried at the bottom under routine security items. He read that line 3 times. He found out about the bus passes by accident. A young man in the mailroom named Tobias, 19, recent immigrant, working the estate while attending night school, had mentioned to a colleague that his commute costs had somehow been covered for 3 months running, slipped into his payroll envelope as a cash supplement with no explanation. Tobias had quietly thanked 3 different people and gotten puzzled looks from all of them. Reed investigated. He brought Calder the summary in the same flat tone he used for everything. "She's been covering it from her own account," Reed said. "She told the payroll administrator it was an error she was correcting. There was no error." Calder looked out the window for a long time after that. He had made decisions over the course of his career that involved significant sums of money and significant consequences. He understood power in the way that very few people did. Not as a concept, but as you either had or you didn't. He had never once, in all of that, been as straightforwardly impressed as he was by a woman covering a 19-year-old's bus fare and pretending it was a rounding error. He started eating breakfast again around the same time. Not because anyone told him to, because one morning Cora arrived at his office door carrying a tray without being asked, set it on the corner of his desk, and said with perfect composure, "You've cancelled your morning break 3 days running. The kitchen made extra." He looked up from his screen. "I didn't request anything." "I know." She adjusted the tray so the coffee was easier to reach. "You also haven't eaten before your 10 o'clock twice this week. You told the grounds crew last month that they needed to take their full breaks or they'd make mistakes. You might apply the same logic to yourself." He stared at her for a moment. She didn't seem nervous about it. She seemed like someone who had calculated whether she had standing to say this, and decided, on balance, that she did. "I have a 9:30, he said. "It can wait 10 minutes. It waited 12. He ate everything on the tray. Reed, passing the office door, slowed to a stop and stood very still for a moment. Then he kept walking without a word, which was the closest he came to astonishment. A month later, the Hale Group hosted its annual private investor dinner at a ballroom in downtown Vancouver. Calder asked Cora to manage the event finances and coordinate the hospitality team. The executive committee exchanged a few glances, because this wasn't typically how things were done. Calder looked at the committee. They looked back. "She's handled this organization's most complicated audit cycle in 3 years without losing a single figure," he said. "I'm confident she can arrange a dinner." Cora was terrified and refused to show it. She spent 3 weeks preparing. She met with the catering team twice and with the venue coordinator 4 times. She stayed until midnight 2 Saturdays in a row to make sure the financial projections were clean. She made sure every server and greeter knew the event plan inside out, not by sending memos, but by sitting down with each of them individually. The night of the dinner, she wore a deep green dress that had been in her closet for 2 years. She'd bought it for an interview at a financial firm in Toronto that had offered her the position in writing and then rescinded it, citing, in careful legal language, that the role required a certain presence in client-facing context. She'd understood exactly what they meant. She hadn't worn the dress since. She put it on that night anyway, because she was tired of letting other people's judgments decide which parts of her wardrobe she was allowed to use. The evening ran without a single notable incident for the first 2 hours. Then Preston Walsh arrived late, with 2 associates and the particular energy of a man who had never in his life been asked to wait for anything. He was a property developer from Calgary, and he had more money than patience, which was saying something. He spotted Cora near the drinks table, reviewing a seating issue with one of the servers. "You," he said it the way people say it when they mean you of all people. "I know you. You're the one from the accounting scandal." Cora turned to face him. She kept her expression level. There was a misunderstanding that was resolved internally. "Good evening." Resolved. He laughed, not pleasantly. "I read about that, the bookkeeper who got caught with her hand in the fund. I was cleared. The investigation was conclusive." He stepped closer. "So they say." He reached out and closed his fingers around her wrist, not tightly, but with the deliberate ease of someone who expected her to stand there and allow it. "Tell me something. What exactly does someone like you bring to an evening like this?" The room had shifted toward them, in the way rooms do when something is happening that no one wants to be caught watching. Cora held very still. She had been here before. Not in this building, not with this man, but in this exact moment, the one where the room turned and nobody moved, and she was supposed to make herself smaller so that everyone else could be more comfortable. Her vision went a little sideways, not from fear. From the exhaustion of having practiced this composure, so many times it had become its own kind of weight. Across the room, Calder had been midway through remarks about the organization's development plans for the coming fiscal year. He had paused, as he sometimes did, to let a point land before continuing. In that pause he looked up, a habit, checking the room, and he saw Preston Walsh's hand on Cora's wrist. He put down his notes. The room watched him step off the low stage. Several people exchanged glances. His senior advisor made a quiet, abortive gesture, as if to catch his attention, and then thought better of it. Calder crossed the ballroom floor without hurrying and without speaking. People moved aside without being asked. He stopped in front of Preston Walsh, looked at the man's hand on Cora's wrist, and waited. Walsh released her. "Mr. Hale," Walsh managed a social smile. "I was just. You were publicly insulting one of my people." Calder's voice was even. "At an event she organized, in a building my company operates. She seemed. She is the reason this evening is running correctly." His gaze didn't waver. "You grabbed her arm without consent. You spoke to her in a manner designed to humiliate her, in front of my guests." Walsh glanced around, looking for the ally who wasn't there. "It was a joke. I didn't mean anything by it." "I believe you." Calder said it simply. "You didn't think you needed to mean anything by it. That's the problem." He stepped past Walsh and stood beside Cora. He didn't take her arm or position himself in front of her. He simply stood beside her, the way you stand beside someone when you want them to know the ground is shared. He looked at her for just a moment. She was holding herself together, with the particular stillness of someone who has learned, over years, to make their pain invisible. He turned back to the room. "I owe this gathering an explanation," he said, addressing the full room without theatrics. "I stepped away from my remarks because one of our staff members was just grabbed and publicly mocked by a man who believed she had no standing to be in this room." He let that sit. "She has more standing here than anyone I could have hired for this role. She has spent weeks making sure every person in this room had what they needed tonight, and she has done it without once asking anyone to notice." A few people near the back began to clap. Then more. Then the room was standing, which it had not done for anything Calder had said from the podium, and which it was now doing for a woman in a green dress, who was trying very hard not to cry and mostly failing. Calder looked at Walsh once more. "Our development partnership is finished. Effective tonight. Reed will have the documentation ready by morning." He said it the same way he'd said everything else, without heat, without satisfaction. I'd appreciate it if you made your way out. Walsh left. A handful of associates who had been speaking with him minutes earlier were suddenly very engaged in conversations on the other side of the room. 3 weeks later, on a Thursday evening when the building had mostly emptied out, Calder found Cora on the rooftop terrace that the accounting team used for lunch on warm days. She was sitting on a bench with a notebook open on her knee, not writing, just sitting with the city laid out below her, and the late October sky going orange over the mountains. He sat at the other end of the bench. "Reed told me you turned down the salary adjustment twice," he said. "I thought it was an error." She didn't look up from the city. "It wasn't an error." She was quiet for a moment. "I didn't want people to think I was being compensated for the incident, or for the gala. You're being compensated because I've had 3 senior finance firms ask in the last 2 months how our audit results are this clean." He paused. "I told them I hired someone exceptional. I didn't mention that she also fixes the coffee machine on the 4th floor and leaves chocolates on people's desks during tax season." Cora almost laughed. Those were anonymous. Nothing in a building this well surveilled is anonymous. She closed the notebook on her knee. Below them, the last of the day, traffic moved along the waterfront streets. "Why did you do it?" she asked. "The gala? You were mid-sentence. You had 50 investors in that room." He considered the question as if it deserved genuine consideration, which, she was beginning to understand, was how he considered most things. "I've spent most of my life in rooms where the person with the most power gets the most latitude," he said. "I used to believe that was simply how things worked. Efficient, at least." He looked at the mountains. "Then I watched a room full of people stay silent while someone hit you. And I thought, I have some power. I have quite a lot of power, actually. And at no point in my life have I thought carefully enough about what I was supposed to be doing with it." Cora turned to look at him. He was still watching the horizon, his profile very still, the way people look when they're saying something true and aren't sure yet how it will be received. "I spent years trying to take up less space," she said, quietly. "Different clothes, different way of walking, different tone of voice. I thought if I could just get small enough, people would stop seeing the things about me that made them uncomfortable." She exhaled slowly. "I never managed it. There was always something wrong." "There was nothing wrong. I know that now." She said it with the particular weariness of someone who has known a thing intellectually for some time before they finally manage to feel it. "Most days." He turned toward her then. "I'm not good at many things outside the work," he said. "I'm told I'm difficult. I'm told I'm unreadable. I have been reliably informed by 3 different people over the last decade that I am not worth the effort." He held her gaze. "I mention this because I want you to understand that whatever I'm about to say is not something I'm in the habit of saying." She waited. "I think you are the most quietly remarkable person I have met in my adult life," he said. "And I would very much like to stop pretending that I'm asking Reed about the audit schedule every morning." The city went on doing what cities do below them, indifferent and bright. Cora looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the green dress in her closet that she had nearly donated twice. She thought about the interview in Toronto, and the man who had left, and the hiring manager who'd used the phrase client-facing presence with such polite finality. She thought about all the years she had walked into rooms already apologizing for the space she was about to take up. She thought about standing in a ballroom in a green dress while 300 people rose to their feet. "I'm going to need you to eat breakfast reliably," she said. "That's not negotiable." He exhaled, a very small sound, almost nothing. "I assumed as much." "And I'm going to be very bad at this," she said it plainly, because she had spent enough of her life pretending. I'm going to assume you've changed your mind. I'm going to second-guess every reasonable thing you say to me. I'm going to apologize too much. I know, he said it gently. You don't have to do any of that with me. I'm aware. She looked at him with her accountant's eyes. The ones that found the thing that didn't match, the figure that was trying to hide. That's why I'm staying. The sky went fully dark while they sat there. Below them, Vancouver lit up in all its particular, unhurried way, practical and beautiful, and not especially concerned with performing either. Cora thought it was the best possible kind of city for learning, slowly, that some things could simply be what they were. She didn't need to become someone else to deserve this. She had only ever needed to outlast the people who told her she did.